I live in a major city in Texas. My apartment complex is gated and in a good neighborhood, but the security isn't extremely tight. Sometimes the gates are left open and anyone could piggyback off of someone else entering with the access code. Maybe twice in the past 3 years, the management has put out notices of vehicle break-ins and other items being stolen from porches. We also have frequent door-to-door solicitors, even though there are signs forbidding it. So this particular Friday evening, I go to bed at about 2:30 a.m. For some odd reason, I was having trouble getting to sleep, so I put on a podcast to listen to and eventually start to doze off. I become aware of a noise that sounds like a clicking sound, but it sounds like one of my upstairs neighbors making some noise. I kinda zone this out, as I'm used to my neighbors staying up late on weekends. After about 30 seconds, I realize the noise is extremely repetitive and getting louder. I then start focusing on it more intently, trying to isolate what it could be and where it was coming from. Suddenly it hits me. It's coming from the entrance to my apartment. I leap out of bed and head to the foyer. I identify the noise right away. The lock mechanism is moving back and forth rapidly, like someone is trying to unlock the front door. I can hear that an object is inserted into the lock and the person is jimmying it back and forth with a lot of force. I instinctively turn around, head to my bedside safe, unlock it with a combination, and pull out my .357 SIG pistol, load a 14-round magazine, and chamber a hollow point round. I head back to the door, and as I exit the bedroom, I see the lock twist and unlatch. I immediately pointed my weapon straight ahead, knowing that if someone comes through, I will have to make a split-second reaction. I decide that if someone comes through my door, I will give them a momentary chance to retreat, but if they do anything other than that, or enter aggressively, I'm going to shoot and ask questions later. They don't enter. However, because I had also locked the deadbolt inside only, when I first moved in a year prior, I remember thinking that the deadbolt was a great security feature, and I got in the habit of always keeping it locked when I'm home. In hindsight, this decision saved me from a life-or-death confrontation. Upon realizing that, I approached the door and looked through the keyhole. On the other side are 3 Asians, 2 men and 1 woman. All 3 are wearing hoodies, so it's difficult to make out their faces. The men have objects in their hands, but I can't make out exactly what. The 2 men are talking back and forth, probably trying to figure out why they can't open the door, even though they have successfully opened the outside lock at this point. The woman is also talking loudly behind the 2 men, such that anyone in the hallway would be able to hear her voice. She's talking in another language. The only words I can make out are blah blah blah, apartment 250, blah blah blah, and she keeps repeating that over and over like a broken record. Upon hearing that, I start to wonder for a moment if maybe they're just drunk and have the wrong apartment number. But that's impossible. To open my lock, they would have to have a copy of my exact key or some kind of lock-picking device. I've never copied my key or even given it to anyone. And here's the other thing. Not only is 250 not my apartment number, but, as I figured out later, that apartment number doesn't exist anywhere in the complex. Standing back from the door, I take a long broom handle and jab it hard in the face of the door, letting them know that I'm on the other side. They immediately stop fiddling with the lock and take off running. I debate whether to call 911 and decide against it until they return. I know they'll be long gone by the time anyone gets there. It would be too risky to follow them to try and get a better description or license plate, and I don't have enough identifying info as it is to make an arrest. I filed a police report the next day and let the apartment management know. They said it was unusual, but they would alert the resource officer and ask for a police presence for a couple of nights. Nothing ever came of the report, but that's not a surprise to me. It's been 7 months since this happened and no further incidents. Nobody else in the apartment has reported anything similar happening. I don't think they'll be back, but one precaution I took was to buy a smart lock for the deadbolt, so I can leave that deadbolt always locked from the inside, even when I'm not home. It's crazy to think that the deadbolt was the only thing between myself and an armed confrontation with intruders. They say you don't really know what you'll do in those situations until it really happens, but I can honestly say I am proud of how I stayed calm and was mentally prepared to defend myself. If there's one good thing that came out of this, I feel confident that I responded the right way and was ready for the unthinkable. My name is Martin. I have this one friend that I would go to sleep over. So about 5 months ago, I went there and something strange happened. I came over, said hi to her parents, and went to her room. We watched films and videos on YouTube, and then we got bored. My friend suggested to call another friend. I approved. She came about 10 minutes later. We were just checking Instagram, telling stories. I suggested to go on Omegle. It's the website that you make fun of with friends, meet some strange people, that kind of thing. So we started video chatting. We met some nice teens who had a party. We were talking with them and so on. We started to get bored, so we changed the subject. A teddy bear appeared. We made fun of it. Then a deep voice started talking. He said, "Hey friends, what's your names?" I looked at my friend and he was creeped out. We didn't answer. Then he said, "Why are you so quiet?" My friend responded, "What's your name, you creepy old man?" We started laughing. The voice behind the teddy bear started giggling. We stopped laughing and started to listen. He was mumbling something. I started to get creeped out. I think my friends did too. Suddenly, he starts yelling, "Just wait. I'll come for you." My friend said, "Okay, well, where do we live, creepy man?" I looked at my friend and said, "Are you insane? Don't provoke him, you idiot." Then the man said the name of our town and, "I'll come tonight." We freaked out and turned off the laptop. We were so scared that we didn't go to sleep. Thankfully, nothing did happen, but to this day I still remember that creepy deep voice and that teddy bear. We talked about it all the time when we were together. I was 11 years old when my family moved to a new town. It didn't take long before I made a new friend down at the end of the block. Her house was located in the corner of a T intersection that dead-ended into a field with lots of trees and a tiny shallow stream. My friend and I sometimes played there, but generally did not go more than 20 feet into the wooded property. There wasn't much wooded land, as probably about 50 feet or so on the other side was a road that was not connected to ours, and we knew that was farther than we were allowed to go. The stream was about 5 inches deep, and we did have fun playing within eyesight of my friend's house. We never saw anybody else there and never had any problems. Another new addition to the block beside myself was a man in his 20s who was just recently married. He moved in across from my friend. He was a nice man and a firefighter. His wife was kind to us and let us play with their cat a couple of times a week. One day, while playing in the stream, we ventured farther than usual. I don't remember why, but we weren't really paying attention to our surroundings. We didn't make it very far because the stream petered out, becoming muddy and full of dead leaves. We were about to turn back when in a small clearing just before us, we saw something unusual, something dark and flying or hovering in midair. We made our way back forward cautiously to get a better look. As I strained my eyes in the gloom, the trees around me blurred in my vision, becoming a hazy background of orange, yellow, and red, punctuated by the deep black of wet tree bark peeking out here and there. The October air was crisp and clean, but the weak sun failed to penetrate the meager but complete canopy of dying leaves overhead. Before long, the black thing before me began to take shape, and I soon saw it was not hovering over the clearing like I thought. It was hanging by a wire. My eyes traveled up the wire to where it was wrapped around a branch that jutted out over the clearing. Still not understanding what I was seeing, I let my eyes travel back down the wire to the black object. The wire was wrapped around what I soon realized was the leg of an animal. The wire was being used to suspend the animal quite low in a clear view of anyone under 6 feet tall. It was so low that any adult could easily reach it without the need of a ladder. Without thinking, we went closer to discover that it was not originally the color black. It was black because it was charred. It looked sooty and greasy with patches of orange fur. The animal, now looking very much like a cat, had been burned. Yes, now I'm wondering if it was burned alive, but that didn't occur to me back then, thank God. My friend and I looked at each other with shock. She was scared to death, her face pale and her eyes wide. I'm sure I looked pretty much the same to her, and without a word, we turned around and hightailed it straight out of the trees, past the stream and out onto the street. We confirmed with one another that we both just saw a burned cat hanging from a tree. We agreed we needed to tell an adult right away. It made sense to go to the new neighbor since he was a fireman, second only in authority to a policeman, and his wife was always home during the day. Their house was also close to the end of the street where we were playing and, well, they had a cat. It made sense in my childlike mind. We knocked on his door and the fireman answered and asked us what was going on. We told him what we had just seen and that he needed to come look. He took us seriously and, looking concerned, pulled on his jacket and stepped out the door. We took him through the small wooded area along the stream to the clearing. There he saw what we saw, a charred cat hanging from a wire from a tree branch over the clearing. I could say he was shocked by the sight of the charred body. He began looking closer at our surroundings, which was something my friend and I hadn't done. Then he suddenly exclaimed, "Girls, be careful." We looked around expecting to see more burned cats or a person, but instead we found out that he was pointing to areas on the ground and at the trees. He instructed us not to move and kneeled down to show us more wire. There was a lot of it, and I followed his finger as he traced its path from one tree to another, making a perimeter around the clearing. It was wrapped around the tree trunks about 1 foot from the ground, meant to make whoever wanted to get close to trip and fall. He then stood up, pointed to pieces of metal in the trunks of the trees. They were razor blades, he said, set into the bark of each tree, sharp edge facing out. Our fireman friends said they were put there so someone would cut themselves if they tripped on the wire and tried to catch themselves on a tree trunk. It was a trap. The cat was bait, he explained. It was bait for a human, though, meant to catch a person's attention and lure him into the clearing in order to cause them harm. I didn't understand why, and when I asked, he said he didn't know. I asked if the cat was his, and he said he didn't know. There's more to the story than we were ever told. Bad enough to make the firemen move away only months after moving in. I had never seen anything like this before, and it took me a long time to understand the level of hatred and malevolence that was behind the act of burning my neighbor's cat, not to mention the illness of someone who would booby-trap an area against innocent children. It was scary and surreal and had left quite an impression on my young mind. Whatever was going on, whether it was meant for us kids, our neighbor, or someone else, I hope to never see such a thing again. I am a female living in the UK. This happened to me when I was around 14 years old. On this particular day, I had spent the day with a few of my friends in a local park. The park was around a 30-minute walk to and from my home. After a day of hanging around with my friends, we decided to head back home. Most of my friends lived closer to the park than I did, but it was the late afternoon and still in broad daylight, so I had no issue with walking home alone. Once my friends and I said goodbye and headed off, I began my ever-so-familiar route back towards home. This route I had taken many times before and had never had any odd or scary experiences until then. I looked across the main road to see a guy with his hood up on the opposite side. It wasn't raining or windy, so I thought this to be odd, but shrugged it off. He was walking at a leisurely pace and seemed to be determined. Seeing this guy, and with it still being quite light, I crossed the road in a diagonal line as to increase the distance between us as much as possible. I was nearing the entrance of a shortcut that would get me to my estate in under 10 minutes. Suddenly, I had begun to get this weird vibe that something was wrong. I had no idea what had caused it, but I had this overwhelming urge to turn around. Well, what greeted me still creeps me out to this day. The hooded guy, who before was at least 30 meters away from me at first, was suddenly less than an arm's reach away. He was startled that I had turned around so quickly and met my gaze with the most unsettling look I had ever seen. I just froze on the spot, not really knowing what to do. I began to turn away again to head to the main road instead. Before I can even stop on the pavement, he grabbed my arm with a smirk on his face and began to pull me into the shortcut. I don't know if it was adrenaline, shock, or what, but with all my might, I began to fight back. I eventually broke free and sprinted towards a pub that was 1 minute away from the shortcut. Once I ran into the pub, the people inside could see how shaken up and upset I was, and the police were called. When they arrived, they took a statement from me and went door to door with the local houses, but to no avail. I had a very lucky escape that day, and I dread to think of what could have happened to me if I didn't manage to break free. At the time this event occurred, I was working as a host-server at a local restaurant in my hometown. Now, my coworkers at this restaurant tended to be more flirty and touchy than at others I've worked. It was never weird or meaningful, at least for me. It was just how it was. I was working there for about 6 months or so when the restaurant hired a new food runner named Alex. Alex seemed like a nice guy, but in all honesty, I don't remember much about him from when he was first hired because we only worked 1 shift a week together, which also happened to be the restaurant's busiest day of the week. He also tended to work the night shifts, where I was always scheduled for morning shifts. After a while of working our 1 shift together, I noticed that he was being more flirty with me than everyone else he had interacted with. We began harmlessly flirting back and forth for a few weeks, and eventually he asked me out. I agreed and told him I was free later that same day so we could do something. Stupidly, I told him to pick me up from my house and gave him my address. A few hours later, he came by my house and picked me up, and we went to a park to hang out and talk for a while. Everything was going great. We were kissing a bunch, and I was having fun. We then got back into his car and started driving around. As we were driving, he confesses to me that he wants to be my boyfriend and that he has wanted to date me for a while now. He also told me that he would stare down guys who were seemingly flirting with me at work until they noticed him and stopped. Mind you, he said this only an hour into the first date, which was also the first time we had hung out outside of work. When he said those things, I thought it was a little weird, but for some reason no red flags went off in my head. I ended up telling him that I would have to think about it, and he offered to take me to a cute little lookout spot in a small city a little while away. I thought it would be cool, considering it would be getting dark soon and we could see the city lights. We finally get there, and we were talking for a bit and then made out for a bit before I had him take me home for the night. After I get home, he is already sending me messages like, "You're so beautiful, I can't believe you actually went out with me," and "I want to see you again ASAP," and "I told Jonathan," another coworker, "about us. I'm so lucky, and I can't believe I'm already starting to fall for you." The first date happened on Friday, and we had made plans to hang out again on that Monday. I didn't want to rush into anything, and I also felt a little overwhelmed by him, so in response to the text, I simply said that I was going to bed soon, but I had a good time and that I would talk to him later. Saturday rolls around, and I decided to take my dog out for a hike that was really far out of town. I get a text from Alex asking to hang out that day at 12. I told him that I was down to hang out, but I wouldn't be around in time to hang out at 12. After I sent that message, I lost cell service and figured that would be the end of it. At about 2, I turned the corner into my neighborhood to find him waiting for me parked outside my house. I was taken aback and asked why he was outside my house. He was beaming as I asked, and he said we were supposed to hang out. I told him that we hadn't made any solid plans and that I was very surprised to see him outside. He told me he only had 30 more minutes before he had to go to work and that we should hang out. I didn't see much of a point, but somehow he convinced me and we went to a park to hang out for a bit. He ended up being 30 minutes late to work because he didn't want to leave the park despite my persistence that he needed to leave because he shouldn't be late for work. Sunday comes along and I'm busy at work and Alex walks in. I was really confused as to why he was there because I knew his shift didn't start for another few hours. I knew this because at the time I would do the schedule write-up. He comes up to me, says hi, and that I look really beautiful. I said thank you, but that I can't talk right now because I was busy trying to manage a late rush. But he just kept standing around watching and being kind of weird. He is standing by me for a while, so I asked him if he wants to sit and get some food, and he says no. So I asked if he just wanted to sit because him just standing around was making me uncomfortable, and he says no. So then I said, "Well then, are you just going to stand around here until I'm off?" His response, "Yeah." At that point, I decided it was just better to ignore him and focus on working, so I did. Eventually, he got bored and left. I felt very weird, and even my coworkers mentioned how weird that was. Now, I usually clock off around 4 every day. However, because of the late rush we had that day, I got caught late completing side work. As I was clocking off, I noticed that it was 4:45, and Alex was late for a shift, which started at 4:30. I figured maybe he came in through the back and I somehow missed him, so I finished clocking off and looked outside to my car. As I look at my car, I notice his car parked right next to mine, with him in it. I stood there for a while, wondering why he wasn't coming in, until it hit me that he was probably waiting for me. I nervously tell my coworker what I just saw, and she wishes me luck leaving and promises to watch me to my car. I walk out to where the cars were parked and tried to ignore him, but he tries to scare me as I go to unlock my car. He yelled something like, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" I can't fully remember exactly what he said. He then gets out and tries to kiss me. For some context, I had mentioned to him earlier that day when he came in that I don't want him kissing me at work because it was unprofessional. But now that I was out of work, he immediately went to kiss me. After what happened earlier that day, I didn't really feel comfortable enough to let him kiss me, so I told him I didn't want to mess up my lipstick. It wasn't a complete lie. I had spent a lot of time getting my lipstick to look good that day and didn't want him messing it up. I told him this, but he didn't listen and kept trying to kiss me. After a few more deflected attempts and him telling me it didn't matter because I was just going home, I told him I should go and tried to get into my car, which he was standing in front of. He let me in and I rolled down my window to say goodbye. Before I could even get the words out, he comes through my window trying to kiss me. I turned away, but he kept trying to kiss me even though I had told him not to. I said I had to go and he finally kissed my head, because I wouldn't turn around, and got out of my window so I could leave. He was messaging me a lot that night, and I decided that I didn't want to talk to him because I was getting freaked out. However, that night I get texts from a coworker saying that Alex won't stop talking about me and how happy he is that we were dating, which had never been established, and how he just wants to take me to the beach after his shift ends, but he wouldn't know if I would go because I'm all about my makeup. At this point, I decided it would be best if we didn't have contact. The next day, we met up in person and I told him that I wasn't looking for a relationship right now and it wasn't going to work out. He asked if I still wanted to hang out with him that day since we had made plans. For some reason, I told him yes, and we went to another park to hang out. We were sitting on a tire swing together, talking, and he pulls out his phone and starts recording me. I really didn't want to be on camera and block my face, but he kept shoving his phone in my face telling me I'm beautiful. For a few minutes, it was really this uncomfortable back and forth of him trying to get me on camera and me saying I don't want to be. After a while, he gave up and asked again if I was sure that I didn't want anything from him, and I said yes. He then grabbed my face and started kissing me. After this point, some things happened that I don't really feel comfortable sharing. What happened left me with some minor PTSD that I'm trying to work through, and has unfortunately already fractured and ruined some friendships for me. After what happened, I never wanted to see him again, and messaged him that I was sorry if I was unclear or led him on, but I did not want any form of relationship with him. He responded with paragraphs saying how amazing I was and how he'll let me go for now and to have a good future. I thanked him for respecting what I said and figured that was the end of it. He later on sent me a breakup love song, but I ignored it. I figured that was the end of everything. However, the next time we worked together, he cornered me and started trying to ask me questions about why I didn't want to date him. I told him that he was very overwhelming and I was not looking for that. I didn't want to talk to him and just said whatever would end the conversation fastest so I could walk away. That was the last shift we worked together, and thankfully, due to a great friend at the time, I was able to take off the only shift I worked with him for 3 weeks straight. When I was gone, though, he kept asking all my coworker friends about me and even tried to message me, asking where I was. I didn't want any contact with him and decided it would be best for me to just block him. About a month after everything, I got a Snapchat notification from Alex requesting to be friends again. I considered friending him, asking him to leave me alone and then blocking him, but After some thought, I figured that just blocking him would be a better option, so I did. Now, 3 months after everything, I get an Instagram notification saying that Alex had requested to follow me. I was confused and a little freaked out because I knew I had blocked him. I then checked my blocked accounts page and figured out that he had made a new Instagram and tried to follow me. At this point, I just wanted to forget and move on. I asked a coworker of mine, who happens to be Alex's friend, if he could just tell Alex to leave me alone. Hopefully it will get through to him. This coworker told me that Alex has a history of charges and that he doesn't understand how far is too far. He also mentioned that Alex has been in China and won't be back in town for another month. I'm hoping that he moves on and leaves me alone, but I'm worried about what will happen when he comes back. I understand that this isn't the scariest story and that there's some better choices I could have made. In hindsight, I realized that there were ways in which I could have handled everything better. That being said, what did happen should have never happened. I just want him to leave me alone and move on. I've been living in this state of fear, worrying if he will show up outside my house again, or my work. Now, Christmas is where I go all out. It's my favorite holiday of the year and nothing can stop my Christmas spirit. Unless if it's what happened this year. Me, my daughter, Beatrice, and her grandparents, my parents, usually go to town and shop for Christmas decor until we can't bear carrying bags over bags over bags of lights and little knick-knacks to scatter around the house. But my parents said they couldn't make it this year because my dad has fallen and broken his hip, and my mom had to stay at the hospital to see if he was doing all right, so it was just me and Beatrice. Luckily, they had just opened up a new mall, and it had tons of holiday shops. It was at the back of town, and I was clever enough that the parking spaces would become extinct in 0.5 seconds back there, so I had no choice but to work my way back there. From shop to shop, there was at least something I found in there that caught my eye, and before you knew it, it was sold. When we finally got back to the end of town, my backbone felt like it was going to let loose and crumble. I was wanting to hurry up, but then, in the middle of the long hallway, there was a mall Santa, looking at me, staring at my daughter. I was a little creeped out, but it was a mall Santa. Those guys wouldn't dare to hurt me or my daughter. But something was off. He was tall, very tall. He was also so skinny that his skin was basically useless at hiding his bones. Beatrice noticed him and started jumping up and down. "It's Santa, Mommy, it's Santa, look, it's Santa. Can we go over there, Mommy, please?" I agreed, and we slowly walked over to him. There were no kids in line. There was no big display. It was just Santa in a foldable chair. We walked a little closer until we grinned, but from ear to ear, showing all his crooked, jagged teeth. That's when my mind freaked and I turned around and started to walk to the shops. Beatrice didn't quite agree. She started to throw a fit. Beatrice never throws a fit. She then started to scream and growl and bite me like a wild animal. It was horrific. Beatrice never acted like this. I was kind of scared about her, and I picked her up and tried to walk her to the car. "But Mommy, it's Santa. Let me see Santa. I hate you. I want to see Santa." I buckled her up, put the bags in the car, and drove off home. But there was something that I remembered. I remembered that the mall Santa said something once I whipped around. He said something along the lines of, "Bad little kids get put on the naughty list," and chuckled. I became paranoid at that point and couldn't sleep until 10 p.m. I then woke up with Beatrice in my face, whispering, "Mommy, Santa is here, look." I looked at the clock. It was 3 in the morning. I guess that Beatrice wouldn't leave me alone, so I got out of bed and went to the front door and looked through a window nearby. I froze. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But most importantly, I wanted to hide. There was the same Santa. The Santa that was as skinny as Jack Skellington and in the same Santa costume as before, rustling through the snow and looking at me while coming to the front door. What scared me most is Beatrice asking me, "Mommy, where's Santa's sleigh?" I didn't know what to do. I grabbed Beatrice and did something that I regret to this day. I hid her in her bedroom closet and ran to barricade the door. I heard pounding on the front door and then silence, but only for a little bit. A window shattered. He was inside the house. I needed some self-defense. I then heard thumps downstairs, but luckily I remembered there was a vent inside Beatrice's closet. I came in the closet to find Beatrice with all the color drained from her face. I managed to rip the vent cover off the wall and started to crawl inside. I was crawling for a long time, until a whoosh of air seemed to come from in front of me. It was from outside. I knew that I could somehow get outside and grab an axe. I somehow got the vent cover off and ran in my PJs and went to the shed and grabbed a small hand axe and got a ladder to climb up the wall to get back into the house. Luckily, I got back into Beatrice's closet and I locked the door behind me and went back into the barricaded room. The footsteps were coming up the stairs now, slowly. Then there was a large bang on the door. The doorknob twisted and turned, then it stopped. The footsteps went down the stairs and out the front door. Then I realized that I had left the vent cover open, and that I had left the ladder there too. I then heard Beatrice scream and laughter in the vents. I heard her wail and scream. Beatrice's life was in my hands. Out of nowhere, I cut the door with the axe, over and over again until it made a hole. It reminded me of the scene in The Shining. I reached my hand in the hole and unlocked the door. I slammed the door open to find nothing except my daughter rocking back and forth, sobbing. I grabbed her, catching a glimpse of the most beautiful light show I could have ever seen at that moment. Blue and red police sirens lit the front interior of the house, and muffled screams of what I presumed were men wrestling. I waited in our room, holding my daughter tightly before a female officer called out my name, saying everything is safe now. My neighbor had heard the commotion and called the police for me, bless their soul. The Santa in question turned out to be a homeless man that wandered our town's streets and had been removed from various properties before. But apparently my daughter and I were something that caught his eye, and he followed us home. To think a simple tradition that even a child was so eager to partake in could be ruined by the likes of this man. The holidays will never look the same to me, or my daughter. This story takes place around 2 years ago in 2016. At the time, I was living in an apartment with my brother, mom, and dad, along with our pets. The only pet notable for this story is our pug, Elvis, who was newly acquired after adopting him from a family who now couldn't take care of him anymore. For some more background information, it's important to take note of some things. The layout of the apartment from the front door viewed the living room on the right, the dining room and kitchen on the left, and in the center, a hallway that led down to our bedrooms and laundry room. The laundry room and master's on the left side of the hallway, and me and my brother's room on the right side. I had my own room, but I bunked with my brother since he had a bunk bed. To get to the beef of the story, I spent a lot of time in my room on my computer drawing digitally. It was a big time waster and a hobby of mine. A lot of the time I'd be listening to music as I did so, until one day when I had paused myself to see a bright light flashing from the corner of my eye. I brushed it off casually, but it was until this became the norm when I slightly questioned the reliability of my eyes, to be honest. I kept quiet of this and treated it like a secret because I knew very well if I went shouting to my mom about how I'm seeing lights, she'd think I'm out of whack. For some weeks, I'd see these lights and become paranoid of staying around too long after seeing one. I never got a horrible feeling about them until it became nighttime. Around this year, I also had great problems with sleeping. I had terrible stomach aches every night, and I always felt like something was there. To say the least, I was always tired and paranoid at times, but honestly, I've always been the jumpy type of person, so I can't necessarily blame it on these events. About some weeks later, my mom called out to say that dinner was ready, so me and my brother stopped what we were doing and got up and made our way to the dining room. As we were exiting my brother's room, I had seen yet another light coming from the laundry room. As I turned to look at my brother, he had a very lost expression on his face, and that's when I realized he too had seen the light. I was the first to speak. "Did you see that too?" "The light, right?" he said. "Yeah, the light," I responded. We blankly went to the dining room and spilled the beans to my mom, who suggested that since it came from the laundry room, it could have been some sort of mishap with the washer or dryer. I protested, admitting that I've seen these things for a long while, and my mom simply didn't believe it. Me and my brother contemplated about this subject for a while, and we both continued to see these lights regularly, rarely when we were together. At one point, the lights began to disappear as if from existence, and we brushed it off. Around the summer season, I was sitting in the living room with my mom talking about stuff. As I glanced up at her, her expression turned very surprised and confused, and when I asked her what was wrong, she looked at me and asked if I just saw that. I had a basic idea already on what she was talking about. She managed to explain that she had seen a light at the entrance of the hallway, and after we both sat there, we saw it again. A short flash at the bottom of the hallway wall. My mom tried to cancel out any possibilities, but none of them seemed to fit. She even went as far as to call my dad and ask about it. Of course, he didn't believe anything. He still doesn't fully believe it. Anyways, as time goes by from then and things go back to normal after the occasional side conversation of, "Oh, I saw a light." And, I guess fortunately, that's all it's been. So I live in the UK and am a 21-year-old female. I run a B&B and am pretty used to having to make weirdos feel welcome. However, they are mostly harmless at the end of the day. But last week's experience was by far the worst and most terrifying. It all started on the Monday night of last week. It was the end of summer break, so a lot of tourists were traveling around my area, so it was good business for the B&B. Staying in one of the 7 rooms, I had a foreign couple and their baby. In another room, 2 girls who had traveled from Australia, and in the attic room I had a lone man, who, to be honest, I got bad vibes from at the very beginning of meeting him. He was tall, had long greasy hair, dirty unkempt fingernails, and altogether he just looked very disheveled. He didn't really talk much either. He just asked what room he would be staying in, walked in there, and shut the door behind him. Still nothing too out of the ordinary in my opinion. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. Now, I spend most of my time in my personal hobby room. I mostly watch TV for a lot of the days and then go upstairs to my bedroom to sleep. I climbed the tall staircase and went to my room. I checked my alarm clock and it was only 9:30 p.m., so I thought I might just lie down and watch some videos on my computer. Halfway through watching my favorite movie, I was interrupted by loud knocking on my door. It wasn't an average knock, though. It was very aggressive. I looked through the peephole in the door and was surprised to see it was the strange man who was staying in the attic bedroom. I opened up the door and he started talking straight at me, not letting me get a word in, telling me that the water pipe in his room had burst and that there was water spurting everywhere and that he wanted me to fix it. I apologized to him and without questioning anything, let him lead me to his attic room. The first red flag was the fact that he shut the door and locked it behind him. The next thing was that there was no water anywhere, and then I remembered. There were not actually any water pipes in the attic. I don't know how I forgot, but I guess I was more worried about the guy asking for a refund than actually questioning whether he was being legitimate about the whole pipe burst thing. But now I was stuck. The only other people who were staying at the B&B were 2 floors below me, so they would never be able to hear me scream. I'm also a small woman, so I had no chance of being able to fight off this guy. I looked at him, and he shot me a yellow grin. He lurched for me, but I leapt out of the way. I noticed something sticking out of his jacket pocket. It was a knife handle. I pretty much ripped it out of his pocket and started swiping at the air with it. I bolted out of there and heard him running at top speed behind me until we got to the 2nd floor, where I heard him running back up to his room. I locked myself in my room and called the police department. I also called all the other guests on their landlines and told them to lock their doors and stay in their rooms. When the police arrived, they found the man hiding in the wardrobe in his room. I guess he freaked out when he heard the sirens. Apparently, he had only had one backpack. It contained a toothbrush, duct tape, a Stanley knife, a Phillips head screwdriver, and some intimate things which I can't even write down, but I'm sure you can guess what I'm talking about. They never found out for sure what he had planned on doing to me, but from the contents of his bag, we all had a very good idea. They took him away in cuffs, and thankfully I've never had to see him again. I plan on moving away at some point soon because I don't really feel comfortable with him knowing where I live. Also, every day I just see the grin he gave me as he was taken away, and his wild eyes. I am 20 years old and living in a smaller city in Missouri, which I have lived in my whole life. Around the time that I turned 5 years old, my parents decided to move our family to a new house across town. The house was part of a quaint neighborhood and built into the side of a hill. This meant that from the front of the house it appeared to be one story, but upon walking around the backyard you could see both levels of the home. Having moved from a small one-story house, I was overjoyed with the idea of having a large backyard and more room to explore and play. Due to my excitement, my parents allowed me to pick whether my bedroom would be upstairs or downstairs, and craving a bit of freedom from them, I decided to have my bedroom downstairs. I ended up moving into a very large room in the very corner of the basement, which had at one point been converted from 2 bedrooms into one space. The room had one small window in the right back corner of the room, which had a small curtain covering it. Upon exiting the room, you could enter a long hallway where you could either turn right and enter the second bedroom or turn left and walk down the downstairs living room. At the end of the living room and opposite the end of the basement was the door that led to the stairs to the upper level. I hate to give such a long explanation, but it's important to know the layout to understand the full picture. The first few weeks of living in the house went smoothly, and my young self was happily enjoying the new freedoms that came with a bigger space. Then I started to notice small, strange things that would happen while I was alone downstairs. I would hear strange sounds such as shuffling feet, quiet tapping, small whispers, and thumping, to name a few. To be fair, I passed most of these off as normal house noises such as settling wood, my parents walking around, or my large chocolate lab Tucker. I have also always had an extremely active imagination, but these sounds were different from where I would commonly hear upstairs. Soon after these noises started occurring, I began to feel like I was being watched every time I walked down or up the stairs, even as far as walking through the downstairs living room. This staring feeling gave me a true visceral feeling of dread and anxiety, like this thing watching me would chase after me if I walked too slowly. I remember that every time I had to turn off the downstairs lights, I would slam the downstairs doorway and sprint full speed upstairs, as I felt like something with dark intentions was waiting for me in the dark. I know, it sounds normal and cliché given that I was a small little girl at the time, yet this feeling of being watched remained for the entire 10 years that I lived in this house. As these small occurrences continued, I had a growing feeling of dread as each night of sleeping in my bedroom passed. Though I had not had a history of waking up throughout the night, I began to wake up regularly between 2 to 5 a.m. almost every other night. I also began to suffer from regular nightmares that would add to the feeling of dread I felt upon waking up. I would have the same feeling of being watched from the corners of my room, which appeared to be a true black darkness, as opposed to the rest of the room, which was dimly lit by my 2 small night lights. Though these feelings continued to persist every night, I refused to move upstairs and give up the little freedom I had from my parents, so I forced myself to believe that it was all in my imagination and it was getting the best of me. A small part of me likes to believe that this is true, but due to the events that happened, I feel like this can't actually be true. The sounds, the dread, and my nightmares all continued over the months until a night that still continues to baffle me as to whether I actually experienced it or not. Another important note before I continue is that none of my nightmares ever went into full sleep paralysis, and I have never suffered from such. So on this particular night, I seemed to wake up at around 2:30 a.m., which was indicated by my bedside clock. I laid in bed trying to force myself to fall back asleep when I began to hear the small sounds of shuffling around the basement hallway and living room. Ignoring it, I rolled over to face my window and burrowed deeper into the blankets. I then saw that my curtains were swaying back and forth, which was odd as there was no breeze in the room and nothing had touched them for hours. The boiling dread in my stomach worsened when the curtains, to my horror, were yanked open and shut by themselves. In my sleep-depraved state, I stared in shock at the curtains before the terror of what had just occurred set in, and I quickly dove under my covers. I forced my eyes closed and tried to collect myself before I heard more shuffling around in the hallway. I covered my ears and continued to tell myself that what was happening was simply my imagination, but to my dismay I began to hear my door open slowly before loudly slamming shut. The pit in my stomach dropped through the floor as whispering voices started to come closer to my hiding spot under the blankets, all words unintelligible yet very distinct. I was debating whether to make a break for the door, and the voices grew closer before a deep, sharp voice said my name right next to my ear. My body went into full survival mode and I leapt out of bed, sprinting for the door and running, screaming bloody murder all the way upstairs to my parents' bedroom. My dad ran out with a baseball bat, closely followed by my mom, wielding a fire poker, apparently thinking that they were being robbed. I proceeded to run into their arms and go into full panic attack. I couldn't stop crying and shaking for hours, to the point that I had to sleep for a large portion of the next day in my parents' bed just to recover from the shock of the situation. I then refused to sleep in my room for the next several days until I had fully convinced myself it was a dream, just to be able to go downstairs again. The following week, I was able to calmly explain to my dad what I had seen, and I felt a sudden compulsion to draw what I believed this thing to look like. Again, I realized that it was probably just my 5-year-old brain creating an image in order to cope, but to this day I am still chilled by what I ended up drawing. I had a clear image in my mind of a girl, about 5 feet tall, with long dark hair and sunken eyes. Cliché, I know, but the image was so clear in my mind and truly seemed to fit this thing that I had been feeling for months. What was truly strange was that after this final instance, there was no more odd happenings outside of that continual feeling of being watched and the noises I would hear while alone. I'd really love to find some sort of explanation or insight on this, as to my knowledge, nothing happened in the house that could have led to a spirit inhabiting it. Was this just a bad, hyper-realistic nightmare? Or something paranormal? I'm a stay-at-home mom of 2 kids. My husband works nights and we often are awake before he gets home. Gets off at 7, usually gets home between 8 and 9. This happened the other day. We live in a townhouse-style apartment, so we have stairs which have sort of a lookout window over our living room. The other morning, I got up and got my son and daughter downstairs, changed, and fed breakfast. After my daughter finished, she asked for Elmo, her way of asking to watch Sesame Street, so we went into the living room. As I walked in, I saw out of the corner of my eye who I assumed was my husband watching us from the stairs, but standing back a little like he was not wanting to be noticed. I thought it was weird, so I turned to say something to him, but he was gone. Not even 5 minutes later, who should come walking in the door but my husband? Which makes me wonder, who or what was on my stairs? The holidays are just around the corner. How's your holiday shopping going? Personally, I've been struggling to find the perfect gift for loved ones. I really wanted to buy my parents something that has meaning. For a really special gift for the special people in your life, you've got to check out the Skylight Frame. Skylight Frame is a photo frame you can update instantly by email from anywhere. It sets up effortlessly in under 60 seconds. Just plug it in, use the touchscreen to connect to your wireless network, and enjoy. Sending photos to Skylight is effortless. Everyone in the family can just email them to your personal Skylight email address and they'll pop up in seconds. It is a black frame and a white mat, so it looks like a real photo frame that adds a beautiful touch to your home. Skylight Frame has a gorgeous 10-inch touchscreen. You can swipe through photos with your finger and even tap to thank the person who sent a photo. 100% satisfaction guaranteed. If you don't love your Skylight, they'll offer you a full refund. You can preload it with your favorite photos for a personalized gift. Important pictures of you and your significant others that they didn't even know you had. When I heard about the Skylight Frame, I thought, What a great way to display all the photos from my phone that may otherwise not get seen by my family. And now, as a special holiday offer, you can get $10 off your purchase of a skylight frame when you go to skylightframe.com and enter code READ. That's right. To get $10 off your purchase of a skylight frame, just go to skylightframe.com and enter code READ. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com, promo code READ.